So glad to be back to be able to talk about this one. I did not know what to expect going into this sequel, especially because I felt like it was sort of the perfect bottle movie. Like, where are we going to go from here? And luckily, every single moment of this movie mattered and absolutely delivered where we could have gone from there. So I'm jazzed, man. How are you?
Yeah. Oh man, I'm great, and I can't wait to talk to you about this movie. I think I've been holding myself back talking to you about this.
We've
movie
been very
as
we've been very cavalier with one another. Okay, I watched this part. All right, I got to this part. Okay, good. I'll see you tonight.
Yeah, pretty much. But nah, man, this movie was fantastic, and what a way to follow up a sequel. Because you're right, and we do want to talk a little bit about sort of this sequel and compare a little bit, which we might get to a little bit later, or we might do throughout the movie. But this movie itself, man, the first thing that struck me, and I think it struck you as well, is just the production is completely different.
Yeah,
like we're a few years ahead, so that definitely makes a difference with technology. This movie came out in 2021. I believe the first one was 2013 or something like that. So it's a big jump in the gap. But yeah, man, what do you think about the way this movie looked? Like just from production point of view.
Well, it really, so two sequels came to mind when I started thinking about this movie and the way that the production value had increased.
Yeah.
And whether or not it maintained the core value of what the story was, and whether or not there was actually like any flash or bang as a result of updated technology or updated filming techniques. And luckily that didn't ever bore any fruit. It just looked beautiful throughout. So mostly here in Drishyam 2, I just noticed that the frame was super sharp. Everything looked beautiful always. And it just underlined what I liked most about the first movie, which was that like we're constantly showing you the scenery. We're constantly setting the scene. Yeah. We're constantly making you understand this is all happening in this small town, and we want to show you the very small nuances of what makes this town tick, so that by the time we get into what makes the people tick, we care about the scenes and the settings in so much as they provide the backdrop for everything these people do. Beautiful. Yeah. But I immediately noticed specifically like the crane shots and the perspective shots. There was so much more overhead, and there was so much more moving through, and it just really worked to emphasize what this movie really gave me constantly was anxiety. Almost immediately, nothing felt safe. But to get back to my original point, the two sequels I thought of were Terminator 2 and Blade Runner 2049. And in the case of Blade Runner, it had been such a long time in between the original in the 80s and the newer one in the late 2010s that, of course, everything looked different, but the stories felt absolutely inextricably interlinked. But with Terminator, it was roughly a similar time gap, right? It was like 5-6 years. Yep. So everything looked better. Everything kind of breathed a little bit differently. And just because we were telling a story in two different times didn't mean that everything wasn't interlinked. And this movie did that same thing beautifully. So yes, aesthetically different, but the story felt naturally progressed, and I was in for every second of it.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. I'm happy they did that, because this could have been like they could have leaned into technology and just made it much more flashy. For instance, they could have had a lot more action scenes, for instance, if they wanted to do that.
Yeah,
because they could
that car chase scene that I was talking about in the first movie that we never got. Like, luckily, we don't get that, because that's not important.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right. They could have really gone for that side of things. There were small things which I think were just advancements in through time. Like, I think there was, in the first one, there was a lot of what I would call the old school transitions. Like, the slow motion closing the eyes and like, the barnyard doors going and stuff like that. We didn't see any of that stuff. That's just a product of the times, I think. But overall, it just looked clearer. And, that's basically the main takeaway I got. Like, yeah, the camera was moving a bit differently. Obviously, I think this is Amazon Studios now or something like that. So they got some Amazon money. So that was a little bit.
I'm glad they did, because man, everything looked indistinguishable from what a Hollywood film would look like, or from a big budget studio film. Let's remove Hollywood from the expectation whatsoever, but it looked like a big budget Hollywood film. It was absolutely gorgeous, but I was worried, are we going to do the same thing, right? Because Terminator 2 and Blade Runner, the two examples I chose, they melded the stories into something new organically. and took us on a slightly different adventure than what their predecessors had done, which is excellent and very much appreciated. But, Home Alone and Home Alone 2 are essentially the same movie with just a different backdrop. So if you're going to get into a movie like this, are you going to tell me the same story twice? Or are you going to use some of the conventions from the first time you told me the story to highlight and underpin and kind of play with my conceptions? And luckily, we got a little of column A and a little of column B here that ultimately came out in the washes. Like you said, excellent.
Yeah, no, it's really good. And even, they did a great meshing of the two. I think the Terminator 2 comparison is really good. Because you could definitely make the argument this is the better movie in some ways. I'm sure a lot of people enjoyed this one a little bit more. If not, maybe a lot of people enjoy that. Love to let us know which one you like more, Drishyam 1 or Drishyam 2. Obviously, a lot of expectations coming with the sequel, and a sequel that's coming after a movie that shook the industry up so much, like this one that's been so successful. A lot of pressure, but I also was pretty happy to see we're getting a lot of the same characters back, but the daughters have a bigger role to play, and we're seeing them sort of grow up, and they also were just fantastic. Nothing was let down in the sequel, which could have been, right, because you sort of relied on some people in the first one. If you have to bring the daughters back. If they weren't, say, traditionally good actors or something like that, or they couldn't pull it together, that could be a downfall here. But that doesn't happen at all, does it? These people were all boarded. Everyone was still acting really well.
Everyone showed up to play. Not a single person came to this film to cash a paycheck. Everyone came in, including my absolute favorite element of the first movie, and I just imagine that it must prevail through all of his films, but Mohan Lal's eyes.
Yeah.
If for nothing else, I appreciate that the film was all the clearer just in terms of picture quality, because I don't know if I've ever seen stoicism in an actor's eyes so beautifully express every range of emotion.
Yeah.
Wow. Every single time they did the little, and it would be most of his face, and he wouldn't shake his head. Yeah. You just see the hint of a tear, or you see a little crease over here, and it underpinned everything, because although he is a man of many words, George Kuti, he does not use his words when he's making his big decisions. And that's one big thing I noticed here. When he's making his spur-of-the-moment decisions, when he's calculating how he feels, he doesn't speak. His eyes do the talking. And it's such an amazing character choice. And maybe it's something he does, I've got to watch more of his movies. Maybe it's something he does in his other movies. Yeah. But I appreciated it so much because it's such a subtle and wonderful thing to see. Because he could be easily blown up, right? Like he could be this crazy, especially in the sequel. He could have been crazed and nuts and wild, but he wasn't. He was controlled. And even when the movie makes you think that he might be losing control via his alcoholism, we get a reason for that. Like, how?
Nah, he was oh my god, but it's starting to see more of this. In this one, I feel like it's even, I don't know if it's better or not, but because in the first half of the first movie, we talked about it being the sort of a sitcom, right? So he can sort of be more relaxed, and that's the only part that's sort of a bit funny, because this movie, the tone is completely different.
Very different.
Mohan Lal, he plays a great role in that he's just showing that, the weight of that secret is just, tearing him apart. Like, you can tell it by his face. Like, even in some of the scenes he's having where he's a bit joyful, there's always this look of sort of, I wouldn't say it's like despair, but there's something always bothering him. In some way, he's just able to convey that throughout the entire movie. Like, there's always something happening. Like, there's not really that joyfulness that he had at the start of the first movie. That is all gone. We don't see that side of him ever again. So that's pretty, as an actor, I've got to give him a lot of credit to just never sort of go back into that, because there are moments in this where he could have gone into that, like the scenes with the daughters, and they're having these conversations, and it's a bit lighthearted between the arguments between the wife, daughter, and father, and the sleepover with the kids and all that stuff. There's moments where he could have gone back into comedy mode, right? Like full-blown comedy. But no, he knows he has to stay in character. I appreciate the hell out of him.
Yeah, there were very few moments where I felt like he betrayed the fact that he was constantly calculating something. Very even in those moments, it turns out that he, it all just, it cycles in on itself. And we get, by the end of the movie, a reason to understand why it's constantly swirling. Like I don't know if I've ever seen a more efficient case of the House of Cards, where everyone has a reason to suspect him. Everyone has a reason to think that he may have done what he did. Everyone has a reason to potentially look into what he did. Everyone has a reason to be angry with him. As opposed to that first movie where everyone was just jovial and loving. Like, the only character in this movie who kind of unabashedly loves George is the hotel manager. You know, he's kind of the only one yet. He's great. He's amazing, but he's pretty much the only guy who's in his corner from the start of the movie to the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And directly because of that, and you see George constantly, you know, working at the movie theater or working on his script, like he's always busy. He's keeping himself busy because he knows that if he stops to think too long, it's going to crush him, right? Like, and then we get those scenes with Ronnie where she's constantly talking to him about her anxiety, and he has to bear the brunt of like, I know my secret. I can't tell you my secret, but I also want you to know that I love you. Like, nothing felt safe. It was almost like watching Uncut Gems. I don't know if you've seen that movie.
Yes.
But that was one of the rare films where I almost walked out just because I was like, I need to take a breath, man. Like, nothing good happens to this guy.
Yes.
And it wasn't to that extent here, but it definitely felt as though George was aware nothing is safe. His family didn't feel safe. You know, the added element of the daughter suffering from epilepsy now, like, everything started to build slowly. And I don't know about you, but at a certain point, I thought the boyfriend character of the younger daughter was also going to become involved. Like, he was kind of my red herring. Like, I almost, at one point in the movie, I thought he would be the crux, that she would have fallen to, you know, telling him part of the secret, and that it was him who would ultimately make it all unravel. I'm glad that didn't happen. I'm glad that we had, you know, somebody else to point to, but man, it just so efficiently, effectively, and satisfactorily built upon the story from the first film in an organic way that, like, of course, 6 years later, nobody would have forgotten. Nobody would have forgotten. And the extent to which the police had not forgotten shocked me.
Yeah, man. It was really well done. Like, again, like, the whole cast came together with this. Like, I think you mentioned Rani, played by Nima. I thought Mina. Wow. Fantastic. Like, I've got to give her, like, she was great in the first movie, but, you know, I think her role was a little bit limited because the focus quickly becomes after the initial scenes, like, about George Clooney's plan and execution. And the rest of the cast is mostly just there to sort of help out during that. In this movie, I think for the first half, it's almost the other way. Like, we see so much of her and sort of the struggle that she's going through. And I love how they play on the differences between the struggles that they both have. Because while George Clooney has the responsibility of sort of having to sort of keep this family safe throughout the entire journey, knowing that there's going to be someone after him at some time, that's always alluded to, right? There's always a sense of fear, always a sense of anxiety, always a sense of like, this guy's going to get caught sometime. He knows that. He knows, they all know that they're guilty and they're living with that, basically. But she has to play the role, and she does it so well that she has to sort of be convincing to us that she is, you know, struggling with this, and there's a reason for that, and that's because she doesn't actually know what's going on. And she doesn't go full blown, you know, she doesn't get the weight of the pressure on her. It doesn't collapse her, but just for a slight moment, there's a small little slither, which that's the, you know, the first twist that comes in with the undercover cops. But essentially, you know, she lets that little bit of a note come out, and then it's like, so you've done so well to keep all this in. Like, I felt so sorry and so bad for her situation, and I could completely understand why she was lashing out all the time, like, to everybody, right? Because she's so paranoid because she doesn't know.
Of course.
And, you know, it's...
How could you not be? How could you not be? When you've been living with that for 6 years and you're so... And she doesn't know what George Clooney has done. She has no idea what he's done and what he is constantly doing. She can't know because he cannot tell her. Because if he tells her, then it could ruin everything that he's trying to build to keep them all safe. It's an amazing... All of that stuff was just crushing down on the weight, but she did such a good job of conveying that. And the writers of the film did such a good job of making you care for her so much by introducing the neighbor, the people that live on their property, and making you certain that she is being beaten by her husband, certain that this is a character we should care for, certain that this may be a character who might help this family at some point. And when you eventually see those two characters snap the salute, that was the moment I sent you a message. I said I literally screamed at my screen at one point, and that was the moment.
Yeah.
I did not see that coming, could not have seen that coming, was blown away by that fact because it was such effortless filmmaking. It was such wonderful character building because I was like, oh man, it's this neighbor who's going to find out something about George Clooney. Like, yeah, but why? Why was he going to find out something? Because even the beginning of the movie, the very beginning of the movie, we see this man running from the police. We see this man who sees George doing something, and we don't even know what time frame it's set in because it isn't until we see Mohan Lal with the beard later on that we realize, oh, that must have happened in the past, and it all just builds, and everyone has agency. Everyone has a reason to do what they're doing, just like the first movie. But here, it's simmering. It's a little bit angry. It's a little bit earned. It's a little bit rough around the edges. It is very much no one knows why anyone did what they did, and they're just beating their fists against a wall with every ounce of strength that they have to try to figure it out. Because it's even less about justice as it is about understanding why. And that salute broke me.
Yo, man.
Broke me.
That scene, wow. Yeah, I'm just like you, man. I had not had any idea that would happen. And the way it happened so organically and it just caught you off by surprise. It's like, wait, what?
Especially because they were told by the policeman who came there, go see the IG. He wants to give you a warning. So you think, as the camera follows their faces, like, oh, they're here to get their warning. And they snap up. That's what?
It was with the biggest twist. That was crazy. Again, this movie does such a great job because it's always challenging in like sequels, right? Like we talked a little bit about them before. We're introducing new characters and new storylines, but the new characters in this movie, fantastic. And starting from those two, but they could have relied on actually the cast from before, right? These guys didn't have to have such a big role. We could have brought back the dad, Ruin's dad, and Ruin's mother. They have a bigger role. They were there, but they were definitely in the shadows. You know, they have their moments here and there, but it's led by almost the other cop that comes in.
He's so good.
The new character, he was fantastic.
Matthew, I believe his name is.
Yeah, I think so. Yes. Is it Thomas?
Or Thomas? That's right, Thomas.
Maybe Thomas.
He was
fantastic,
phenomenal. I loved him in every single scene that he was in.
Fantastic.
So calm. So collected, so certain, and there's only the one scene where he gets a little bit upset where he's like, and this is a war, but that's literally the only one scene where that happens. Every time I saw him on screen, I was like, what does this movie remind me of? It's not anything in Hollywood. It doesn't remind me of anything in Hollywood other than the broader, like, kind of police procedural-esque nature of this.
Yeah.
But even that is a disservice to it. Because what it ultimately reminded me of, especially with his character coming on board, was Les Miserables. Like in this movie, that character was Javert and Georges Clooney was Jean Valjean. Like both of these characters are flawed. Both of these characters are right. Both of these characters are wrong. But both of them are so steadfast that they're going to do every single thing that they can, including putting two people in a house for 2 years. To try and figure out what they did.
That part was
unbelievable.
Crazy.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, no, that part shocked me. Like I was like, wait, so you're dedicating a lot to this, this case. But obviously, they do show I think it's a conviction and the motivations are so strong behind everyone, including the cop, because there's such a great contrast between how he operates and the previous IG operated, right? Like, she's in this for a bit, Geeta, the mother of Varun, but her tone was basically, do whatever you have to. And I'm kind of glad they didn't bring back Sandovan.
I'm very
who was
glad.
There from the last one, because that worked really well in the first episode. And I think he did a fantastic job in the first one. But if they repeated that again, I'm like, we've seen this before. We know what's going to happen. So having a different approach with a calculated cop through Thomas, along with the other two secret detectives. It was so good. It was such a refreshing and different take on this movie that I appreciated. That you can watch this movie and the scene is completely different because of that. You know, there's some similarities. Obviously, George Clooney is who he is, but it's completely different in so many ways because of the characters they used. It's just so different.
That one twist. So the fact that they were the secret police and, you know, Thomas was behind them the entire time made it so that by the time we got to the end of the film and the bigger reveals start to occur, which you kind of expect from the first one, you know, you're trained almost after watching that first movie. Like, what did George Clooney do? He must have done something. So they still hit, and there's still incredible twists, like it mind-blowing stuff. But that one that hits you right in the middle of the film makes all of that at the end feel totally different, because now you're contending with something that even the considerable mind power of George Clooney could not have foreseen. And more importantly, what Ronnie could not have foreseen, because that entire relationship works, like we were discussing earlier, by showing how broken she is about the fact that her one confidant, because she could not have her husband, was working against her the entire time. And again, it's in the eye acting. Yeah. Like the moments where they interact with each other just briefly after the reveal occurs that you know, now the family knows these two had been working against them to try and collect information against them. It breaks your heart, because Ronnie was certain. She was certain she had a younger sister. She says it so frequently. Yeah. You see her confiding. She's the only source of comfort, because her eldest daughter has epilepsy and her youngest daughter is now rebelling. So it was so many, like the House of Cards was multifaceted and multi-layered. It even existed for Ronnie's motivations in finding solace, right? Like the scene of her walking away from the church in the graveyard where she's like, don't be worried about the police. They're not here for you. Like it just, and you being in on the plan as a viewer at that point, your heart just breaks. Like, this poor woman has been through so much, and her only solace was working to get information against her. Like, that was brutal.
Yeah, man. And the way that they did it as well, right? Like what the cop used to sort of break that apart was basically like, oh, you know, society's talking about your daughter. Like, it's like, that's the point that just was like, oh my God, like she could not take that. Despite all that she's been through, that one sort of hint that, look, there might be issues with your daughter getting married now because of this false fact, broke her. And I thought that was so good, because you see how strong that Nima is, Rani is basically about this movie, and it takes such a strong, you know, will to sort of break her. Someone that she befriended so closely, and we credit to this actress as well, man. Anjali Anish. She doesn't have a huge role, but like some of the scenes where she's just broken, it's genuine what she's going through as well. Like, she cared for this person and she feels horrible for what she sort of had to do, but, you know, part of the job. And that's sort of something we've probably seen a little bit of just with these kind of things, but she did a fantastic job in conveying that.
She even has the moment where she's talking to Thomas after we get the first big reveal, where she was like, oh, sorry, I call her Chichi, you know, like, that's just the way I'm like, the
conditioned.
my issues with the movie, my very small issues with the movie, are very much in the fact that if this had been a 5-hour movie, everything that I would have liked to see more of absolutely undoubtedly would have been on screen. My main one was more like, I wish we could have seen more about the epilepsy with the eldest daughter, right? Like, and because the marriage storyline made sense to be brought more to the forefront, because obviously they then use that as kind of a weapon against her, because, you know, well, now nobody wants to marry your daughter because all of this information is swirling out there. So it all works and it all made sense. And I'm not saying that I didn't still love the movie. It's just that these small things, I'm sure, exist in a 5-hour cut of this movie somewhere. Right. It was masterful. The way things are set up, the way things that you don't know you had to pay attention to prove to be things you should have paid attention to, and the way the things you paid attention to may well have been seen incorrectly, was just consistently intriguing. And in that final 10-15 minutes where you're unwrapping it all and you're looking at all backward, you know, through 2020 backward vision, it proved to me that some of these scriptwriters must have worked diligently over the 6 years, in the same way that George Clooney was writing his story to try to be able to make it make sense. Like the entire affectation about there being different climaxes and arguing about the different climaxes with the scriptwriter seems to me like what the people writing the movie probably went through. Like, how are we going to make this make sense to an audience who loves this so much? How are we going to leave them satisfied when they leave the theater so they don't just say, you made Drishyam 1 again, or you made something so different that I don't care about it. And man, they threaded the needle beautifully.
Perfect. Yeah, no, it was really, I do want to touch on sort of the twists and turns a little bit more because of the whole book and the sort of, even, you're right, the stuff you mentioned about it, it's kind of meta in a way.
Very much.
But I do think the daughter thing, I think you are right. It wasn't rushed, I feel, and they definitely could have done more, but I do give them credit for just sort of even, fit that into this movie because they do show how much of a struggle she's going through from the start, right? And it's done credit to her as well. Like, there's a small scene where they're driving in the car with George Clooney and the daughter, and you see how she's just somber. She's just sad, she doesn't say anything, but it's just the way that it's framed, the way it's shown. You can tell that she's obviously going through a lot, and that is having a huge impact on the whole family. Small little things like, she hears cops, she hears, sirens, she hugs up to her mum. She's not a child. She's, in her sort of later years, and she's going through all this trauma. This just complements the whole darkness and ominous feeling. The other thing I wanted to mention was about that was also they had that one song in this movie, and if you compare it with the song in the previous movie, it was all about a good time.
Yeah.
The first movie, the song in that one was more about, hey, we're going out to a nice time, we're going to see this nice place, we're going to this nice tour and doing all this nice beautiful stuff. This is like sorrow. Like it's almost a song for Nima, I think. For people in Nima. Rani basically, it's her story and what she's going through. So you're seeing it through her perspective. It's completely different. So again, like these small things all add up to create this masterpiece that this movie is. But I do want to touch on now a little bit about this whole movie, man, and how this whole thing unravels itself. I'd say probably after the first twist, it does a good job of just sort of maintaining that entertainment factor. But then it's sort of, at one point, I think when the producer comes in, man, does it change. And we get to understand what George Clooney has been up to for the last 6 years. And just in that space itself, how well that's contained is so good because it's like a burst of power. Like, hold on, let me tell you what I'm fearful of. And it's like, what's George Clooney been doing here? It is insane.
It is
what
wild.
Do you think about going on this journey?
Wild. And the brilliant masterstroke of having that scriptwriter being involved with delivering that third act is because George Clooney is going to have to be standing on that witness stand and saying nothing. So all of his plan hinges on luck and him saying nothing once he gets on that witness stand, right? So you have to have somebody who's going to be able to come in and deliver the exposition I know you love so much, but luckily done beautifully.
Really well.
You have to have somebody who's going to be able to come in and peel it back, because Geeta did it in the first movie, right? Where she was like, this is what he did. And she starts telling the audience everything, right? Like so how she was able to pull it back. And that scriptwriter saying like, okay, so this was the first draft and here was the story and here's what he did and here's all the things that he was saying. So as he's laying out the story elements of the script that George Clooney was writing with him, and we actually get to go back in time and see for 6 years the lengths he was going to be able to create the exact same setting he did in the first movie, which was simpler for him, where he could grab his youngest daughter and run toward the news media and say, this man beat my daughter, so that he could get public support on his side. His mission here was to sow so much doubt that no one could, in their right mind or conscious, say he must have done it. Even though at the end of the movie, everyone's like, we know he did it. We just cannot prove it.
Yeah.
So we see him befriending the caretaker. We see him doing everything that he did. But the one that truly blew my mind, because again, we're going back to the beginning of the movie now, talking about his alcoholism, and you see him drinking with his drinking buddy, the actor that he's going to hire for the movie, because it's got to be an up and coming actor. The fact that he was the one running the CSI morgue all along, and you had no idea, and that George was going there to drink with him, just so that he could condition him to get so stinko drunk and so trustworthy of George that he would get him so drunk that he could swap a skeleton was unbelievable. Like, it's unbelievable, but you believe it with every fiber of your being because you know the lengths this man goes to. And it's 6 years worth of time. We're not talking about him doing this 6 months after the event of the first film. We're talking about him slowly laying out these seeds over 6 years. And the fruit that it bears is sensational. It's scrumptious. That reveal was the one that really got me there at the end, because the judge saying like, this body is not Varun's, that didn't hit me so much as, holy shit, how did he get that skeleton from there to there? Because and you see in his eyes, he's terrified. So us seeing a little bit of this time, then coming back to this time, then seeing a little bit of this time, then seeing a little bit more of that time, boggled my mind, especially when he grabbed that suction cup and pulled the body from underneath his chair at the movie theater. Whoa! Whoa!
He's been keeping it with him the whole time. It's no, that's probably the one that struck me the most. I mean, this hit me when it's like, hold on, this isn't even the body, and I was like, wait, where's this taking us? Because we know that that's a body. Wait, what happened here? Like, something's happened. And then when they reveal the fact that it's a kid, it's the guy at the morgue, and he's just sort of changed that around. Wow, it was a real shock, I gotta say. It was such a fun ride, and the whole concept about the book. He wrote a book essentially.
That
that is all planned out. That is mind blowing to me. Like,
well, and again, like I was saying, all he's attempting to do is sow public doubt. So it's all believable, right?
Yeah.
Like, it all checks out. So everyone that is there publicly that is not directly connected to the story, because we're really following maybe 6 to 12 people throughout the entire event of this film. But if an entire country is going to make judgment on a man, well, then we're talking about millions and millions and millions of people, right?
Yes.
So he published this book, and then we have this person who's on his side out there saying like, the police were so jealous of him and they were so desperate to build a case against him that they found this book that they believed to be close enough, and they assigned all of the actions and the motives in this book to what George Kuti must have done, and solely because he was able to pull off that skeleton switch, it all checks out. So that's that one little bit of luck. But he was ready, and I kept thinking earlier on in the movie, I think it's in the first third, the man that they visit who's dying, and he's like, "Oh, George, you are my good friend," and we don't know this man. We don't remember him from the first movie, right? We don't remember him at all. And in that moment at the end, we're like, oh.
Yeah. I love it because we sort of mentioned how it's sort of, with sort of a little bit of comparison with the beats of the first one. It's like it takes the similar concept of what he did in the first movie. We see how dedicated he is, but that's in a short spurt, right? He does that all sort of across 1 or 2 days. This one we see how much planning he can do given 6 years. So it's fantastic sort of see that it's almost like it's taking the first element and be like, wait, we did this the first time. Why don't we do it again? But this time just make it even more insane and show what George Kuti is actually going to do.
But they made it all check out.
For 6 years.
Because I completely agree with you. In the Home Alone sense of Home Alone 1 to Home Alone 2, what happens in the end? Well, Kevin sets a bunch of traps and he defeats the villain. In Drishyam 1, what do we get? Well, we get a man who's very good at thinking and observant, and who gets public opinion on his side, and he eventually subverts arrest, right? And he wins. Yeah. In this movie, we get a man who gets public opinion on his side, who eventually subverts arrest and wins. But the context that you did not see coming throughout the entire film, which here by the end is proved to be so broad and so vast and so grand because of that time gap. That time gap is absolutely necessary. If we had done it within a year or 2 years, like most Hollywood sequels, I don't think it would have hit the same way. But because his daughters are so much older, because so much more time has passed, and because we get that reveal that not only have the police never stopped looking, they got so obsessed in the final 2 years that they put these secret police in a house on their property to watch them and bug them, that it becomes so much more compelling. So even though the finale, the crescendo of the film is very similar to what we get in the first. The contextual parts that surround it and the symphony and the notes struck throughout the movie are so different, and there's so much more tension and less safety that it all ultimately comes out. Like, that was the biggest tension really for me. And like I told you in the first movie, I'm not necessarily rooting for George other than like, I hope his family's going to be okay. George Kuti could have ended up, and I think he would have been fine to end up in prison for what he did here, so long as he could convincingly say, like, I did it, and make them believe.
Yeah, and not his daughters.
Right, right. So his daughters are going to be fine, especially now that we know his eldest has epilepsy. Like, that's horrifying stuff. You want them to be okay.
Yeah.
But that swan song by the end of the film is incredible. And then we get that final note from Thomas right before the credits roll where he's like, and he's probably going to begin preparing for our next attempt right now. And isn't that the worst punishment of all? Like, if there's going to be a Drishyam 3, George Kuti must be either like a little bit insane or so bedraggled that we have a very different version of him, because this magic trick can't work twice unless we're talking like another insanely long time gap. You know, also we don't have a skeleton anymore. You know, he dissolves the skeleton and he gives it to Geeta and her husband, right? So I doubt that they would do a third, but if they were going to do a third, I would like to see George Kuti's entire perspective have shifted so drastically that he is now like broken under the weight of what he did.
Yeah.
Or I would like to see the mantle of trying to figure out how to subvert the expectations of the police or arrest be passed on to his youngest daughter, for instance. Like somebody else who is now going to take up the charge of protecting this family just so they can continue to live. I'm not saying that, you know, that's absolutely what's going to happen. I doubt they would make a third, but if they did, I think some of the infrastructural change would have to happen, because you can make lightning strike once, and they did, and it was beautiful. They made lightning strike twice here after 6 years.
Yeah.
A third time is going to be very difficult to pull off.
Yeah, no, I have no idea what they're going to do. I think they are in talks for the third one to happen, actually. So I think that is going to happen. But again, to be honest, if I was to like dictate what happened in the second movie after what's the first movie, I probably wouldn't be that close to knowing what happened. So I think that, like, I do really appreciate, you're right about the Hollywood fact. They sort of wait a year or two, and then it's just like sequel out. It's when they waited, like, 7 years for the movie to come out, from 2013 to 2021. So they really gave themselves a lot of time. And they kept sort of the fan base really on edge, waiting for this movie to come out, I guess. So if anything, it probably will be a while, I think. And so I think the whole tone will be completely different with who George Kuti is. But I'm really fascinated as to what they do if they do something like that. It's been so successful, so they might just have to. I don't know how common sequels are in like indie movies in general, to be honest. Like in Hollywood, we're sort of seeing a trend. Like if a movie's successful, you're gonna
make 2 or 3.
Yeah. Exactly, start the franchise. But in Indian movies in general, I'm not seeing that trend as common. So this show was an exception because it was just so commercially successful and so regarded so well, worldwide, because they had so many remakes, including one in China, right? So like it's pretty crazy. But I'll be fascinated with what they're thinking about right now. So sort of, because they're going to give themselves time. I think they're going to give themselves enough time to think about what they should do and how they should do it. But yeah, it's going to be, like, I mean, the way Drishyam 2 played out at the end, just sort of last note on Drishyam 2, the whole, like, last phase was so engaging and so riveting. I loved it so much. Like, it was such a great ride to see that. You're right, it kept you tense throughout the entire thing, but you sort of pop up and be like, what's going to happen here? And it's almost like disbelief after disbelief after disbelief. You're sort of in a submission, like, wait, what's happened here? And, it does end on sort of a really sort of somber tone right at the end. This isn't, in a way, it's kind of a tragedy. Everyone's life is worse. Like, George Kuti and his family are going to keep living with this, you would think, because they're living with the guilt. I'm not sure if the cops are going to be after them. as much, but I don't know what's going to happen now. Like, do they just feel free?
That's a good, cool angle. Like, who else could be coming for that?
Yeah,
because that was one of the other compelling things about the movie we haven't talked too much about was the Jose character.
Yeah,
and his motivation. So every time we went back to see him, after it's revealed that the first opening minutes of the movie are all about him having witnessed George Kuti burying the body, which he didn't know he was doing. But, when he puts that stuff together, one of the most compelling scenes in the movie was George kind of looking at him in the police station and realizing, like, man, if I had offered this guy a job at the movie theater, this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
Like there's just, it's that house of cards. Everybody is like, God. And maybe there's another character out there that has a parlance. Maybe there's somebody else out there that has a reason to care. And the cool thing about this movie is that it showed me there's so much more ground for them to break in the intervening space, right? Like, and we can bring new characters into this and they're all going to matter and they're going to be engaging. So I'm sure if they do a third, which I can't imagine how they would do it, I would show up. All right. Like if I was in India, I would be there opening night, but I will be here I will be here for it as soon as it hits streaming, right? Like just, it is such a compelling franchise. And the way that they knocked out the first and second movies was so extraordinarily satisfying that I am all here for it. I'm happy to put a button in it and say that this is the end, just knowing that George Kuti is going to live the rest of his life in fear. And that nobody really gets what they want out of this movie. It's like you said, it is tragic. It's Empire Strikes Back. It is very much like how can we come back from this? Well, you can't, you can't. I don't necessarily want to see it become a huge franchise. I would see whatever the writers of this film do going forward though. If it's Drishyam 3, great. If it's another movie, sign me up. Because it is so compelling, it's so smartly written, and every single thing matters. And that's rare. That's very rare.
No, definitely. We'd love to know what else Jeethu Joseph, the director, screenplay writer as well. So I think he did a dual role here. People in the comments, let us know what else he's done and if there's anything else we should check out that's similar to this. Because, I'm definitely on the same boat. We'd love to check out more of what they've done. Because, this is... definitely have a good way of storytelling, and that's the best part about this movie. The storytelling is so great. The best part about this, like the meta part as well. Like the movie we watched is Drishyam 2, like is the book that he wrote. That's a fantastic part. Like, so it's like, okay, would you like to see that movie that you talked about in the book? Well, you have seen it because you're watching it. It's really, really smart. I think it's really well done. But before we sort of go to Disco, man, I do want to give some quick shout outs, some quick mentions, because we had a few people that recommended us this movie. So, thank you for everyone that comments on this. Obviously, we appreciate it so much.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. So, as many comments as you got, and, we'll try to answer them as often as we can.
Correct. Yeah, no, we love engaging with the fans out here. So, let us know what you thought about this movie.
Thank you. For me personally, thank you for suggesting it because I had an amazing time.
No, it's absolutely awesome. So thank you, John Matthew, Rahul R, SJ, and Anoop PC, who I think Anoop recommended us 1 and 2. So thank you, mate. You guys are awesome. Like, just keep... Like, we need more recommendations, I'll be honest. Even though you guys keep recommending us movies, we're doing a lot of content here. So, keep them coming because love to sort of see what the people want, I could go off and pick any movie, but if you guys want me to review a movie, I'm going to put that as a priority for us. But I think we can get to the final part here, Doug, the D scale, the Drishyam scale. And we should rename it the Drishyam scale. But
how many skeletons would you rate this on the Drishyam scale?
Yeah.
How many police station floor crackings would you rate this?
Yeah. Oh, crazy, man. I'm going to assume it's going to be somewhere around about where we had last time. But I would be hard pressed to say which one I liked better. The only reason I would say I like the first one a little bit better is because the second one cannot exist without the first one. There is a universe in which, some sequels could be entirely removed from their predecessors and you're totally fine. But I like them equally as much. So we're definitely up at a high
up near a high, dynamite dope. Like it's almost impossible to choose between those two things because, again, just like the first one, I was constantly leaning forward a little bit more, and the fact that I did that audible scream in my basement when we got the reveal about the neighbors, any movie that can make me feel like that. One of the last ones I can remember where I had a visceral reaction, like an audible reaction, was Ford versus Ferrari. There were just some scenes in that movie that really got me like, whoa, like we're doing something here. And this one really gave me that, and it was extraordinarily special. Like so much so that every single person I know here in America that has never heard of this, like myself, I'm telling them about it. Because it's extraordinarily compelling, and it's a story that I think anyone who appreciates good storytelling will fall immediately head over heels in love with, like me.
No, definitely, I'm right there. It's hard to. I don't know if I like this one more than the second. If I like the first one more or the second one more, I really can't tell because it kind of just works so well together. That's another part that works really well in this. You can watch 1 and 2 and see the whole sort of story as to what George Clooney and his family have been through, and you just get a great picture of, wow, I'm glad we did these sort of in close time, but we really got that impact of basically what the family's gone through. But yeah, I'm on the same boat. It's a dynamite dope. It's around that 8 to 9 out of 10 kind of movie. It's fantastic. I absolutely loved it. The twist, you're right. I think the first reveal was probably one of the biggest, and it just hits you at the start. So in the second one, you sort of wait until the end and you have your mind blown at the end. But this is like, wait, here comes, you wait a little bit and here it comes. And you're like, wait, what? This is not what I expected. And then it's like, get ready because you're going to see more and more stuff coming now. So yeah, this movie's great. This movie's fantastic. Definitely recommend it highly to anyone that enjoys. I just want to say, if you're learning how to sort of write movies, watch this kind of movie.
Study it.
Because they do a fantastic job.
Study it. Yeah. Every scene, every character that's introduced. I mean, like I said, there was only one red herring. And that was, the younger daughter's boyfriend, that she was speaking with at school. We even have that scene where Ronnie sees them talking in the woods over by where the calf was buried. And she's like, what are you doing? Stop that. Like, I was certain that it was going to happen. But that only served more for me to be suspicious of the other people around her. But I was never suspicious of the neighbors. And that twist is like M. Night Shyamalan, with the exception of The Sixth Sense, has not written that kind of twist yet. No. Like, it was extraordinary. That was exquisite because it mattered so significantly to the eventual outcome of the film, to the individual characters, and to the antagonists and the protagonists. Like, that was just a masterstroke. A masterstroke.
Yeah. It was fantastic. And like, I think the other red herring was I thought that the character from the start, the guy who went to jail, would have more of a role to play.
Yeah.
So he comes in later, right? So your mind goes completely away from the neighbors because you're thinking about all these other people. So they just bring it in at the last minute with the salute, and you're like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. No, this is not happening. So fantastic movie. I highly recommend. Yeah. If you haven't seen this, what are you doing? Like, stop listening to this and watch it now.
Just go watch it. Just go watch it. Go spend 2.5 hours in a beautiful place with some extraordinarily written characters and a story that you probably will not see coming. Even like that, I think that is the biggest success of it, is that even though I knew the third act was going to deliver us a twist, that middle twist, it knocked me for such a loop that it almost reset my brain. Like I almost was working backward to be like, oh man, are we going to now get an inversion of what we got in the first film? Like, I was guessing so wildly in so many different areas that it worked for me to not focus on things that I could have clearly seen in every frame from that twist on that would have let me know what George was up to, but I wasn't paying attention to it because I was so focused on the fact that that twist was so effective. And I felt not necessarily like an idiot. I was thoroughly happy to have been hoodwinked by something. Definitely. That's awesome. That is incredible.
Really awesome.
So
man.
Cheers to the filmmakers and everyone behind this movie, because that was an extraordinary time.
Yeah, definitely. There's a reason why this is one of the most popular movies in the probably Indian film industry. I think this is probably passes the Malayalam film industry because it's just been remade and remaked all over the place. So yeah, it's definitely lives up to the reputation. But Doug, man, I enjoyed talking about this movie so much, man. I'm so glad we got to cover off this movie with Mohan Lal, and yeah, man, we're definitely gonna check out more of Mohan Lal. So let's try and find another Mohan Lal.
I got to see his eyes and something else. I got to see if he just keeps me engaged.
Yeah, definitely. But thanks everyone for listening. Always appreciate the support you guys give us. And yeah, we'll see you guys pretty soon.
Yeah, thank you guys. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Getcha.